Hi everybody, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be talking about frequently asked questions regarding residency interviews. These pertain mainly to radiology, but I'm sure that they have similar characteristics to other specialties as well. So whoever's watching, welcome to my channel, and I hope that this helps you in some way. The first question that I'm going to be answering is about program culture and how do you assess program culture? Very hard to do sometimes, very good question. I will say in the past, when I answered this question, I spent a lot of time talking about social media, looking at their social media. That includes Instagram, that includes Twitter or X. I don't know if they have YouTube channels, like if they have tours and things like that available online. But I will say that now, like sort of shifting a little bit as I've had more experience, I think that the main thing that tells you really about the program culture is talking to other residents that are in the same area, or medical students or attendings, you know, someone that's in that same area. Because social media, websites, YouTube channels, virtual like open houses, they are all able to be curated in a way. Like they can put their best foot forward. They can say, you know, we don't do any of these things, we have every holiday off and whatever. And they may not tell you that, well, someone has to cover that holiday, you know, like they may not tell you all the nitty-gritty details that you really want to know. They might not tell you that they do a lot of scut work, or that they're only one in like 5 programs that still take 24-hour call. Like no one's going to put that out there on their social media necessarily, but that's the stuff that you hear sort of through the grapevines. And the reason I say that you should talk to people in the area is because the residents that are at a program are usually advised to tell you all the good stuff about the program. They're usually told, like, that's what they're supposed to do. Their job is to recruit people. And I do know that there are some residents that'll say, like, avoid this program at all costs. There aren't that many bad radiology programs, by the way. There are not. But the point is that you want to talk to people that are not directly in the program, but are around the program who would have heard stories. Because that's how things like core failure rates really come out, is you hear through the grapevine, like, did you hear this program had blah, blah, blah? Like, that's how you hear about these things, you know? You don't really hear about them directly from the program, you hear about them through other people. So that's what I would say about program culture, is just talk to a lot of people. And where are you going to find these people, right? Like say you are in the Midwest and you're trying to apply to the West Coast. Well, I would say that that requires a little bit of effort on your part. Going to conferences, you know that I'm pro-conference, but going to conferences is a great way to meet people from other regions who would maybe know things about other programs. And keep in mind that other medical students may not always, you know, like, I don't want to say that people can lie, but people do crazy stuff during interview season. It doesn't always bring out the best in people. Like, sometimes if they really don't want you to interview somewhere, or they don't want you to match somewhere, like they'll tell you stuff that's not true. And of course, I really hope that that's not the case. But take everything you hear with a grain of salt, corroborate the information, make sure that you talk to lots of people, and then that's really how you're going to find out about different programs. You know what? That brings me to my next point, that culture changes. There's sort of 2 parts of program culture, okay? Program culture is shaped by not just like historically what the program has been, right? If it's a very traditional, very old school mentality program, like that will definitely shape the program. But the other thing that shapes the program and molds the culture is the people. Now, the thing is that people are transient, right? Like people come and go from different departments. Not only do the residents change every 4 years completely, but the attendings come and go. And so that sort of really shapes the program culture. You might get a new program director who is totally different from the old program director, maybe much younger, fresher, has different ideas, wants you to take wellness days, more retreats, and that can totally change the shape of the, you know, what the program looks like, versus somebody who's very traditional, no days off, no sick days, you have to come in no matter what, like totally different mindset. Similarly, I would say that not like the marital status of the residents, but also like who are the residents at the program right now. And this is obviously more important in like smaller programs where, you know, one person is a bigger part of the program than like in a larger program where you sort of have a lot more different types of people. But regardless, if you have a majority of residents that are married with kids, you're probably not gonna be hanging out as much as a program that has like all single residents, right, who all just want to go out and hang out. And the reason I say that, not that the reason I say that, but I lived it, right? Like in residency, I know that before I started my residency, the classes before me they were like single, they all hung out all the time. And then my class, like or when I was there, my cohort, I should say, not just my class, but my cohort, we hung out sometimes, but it wasn't quite the same. So every class has its own unique like personality, and that obviously you can't shape because you don't know who you're gonna match with. But like, then I went to fellowship, and I was one of 2 people, I think, that had kids. I'm trying to think, I mean, there were other people with kids, but like people were much more likely to go out and hang out after hours, and I got like so much more FOMO than I ever got as a resident. And it's just totally based on who you are with. And it's not because like my program had a culture of people that went out all the time and hung out all the time, but it was just the personalities of my co-fellows that wanted to hang out and stuff. And we were in New York, like it was fun, and we had time and energy and things like that, and they didn't have kids. That's the other thing, is like some of them didn't have kids, so they wanted to hang out, and many of them didn't have kids. So like, and then I did have a kid, so I couldn't hang out, and that sort of changed my experience. So yeah, I think it totally is dependent on the historical nature of the program, the attendings that are currently there, and remember that attendings come and go. It's not just the program director that can shape the culture, but also your attendings. You have good attendings, you have bad attendings, and then if there's a new chairman or something, that can really shift the entire cohort of attendings, right? Like a lot of people leave, new people come in, a lot of different energies. So do your best to figure out the program culture, know that it changes. People like me who are a couple years out will have still better information than people that are much like further out, and know that a lot can change in a short amount of time. And that's a good question if you're still watching this. If I didn't just talk your ear off, if you're still watching, that's a good question to ask programs is, are there any major changes coming up to your program, chairman, and are they going to be completely honest with you? Unlikely. They're not even honest with a lot of attendings half the time. But it's a good question to ask. If there's a program director change and they already know that it's happening, or something is happening, they're adding more residents, or it's just a good question to find out if something major is going to happen that really could affect the residency program and the culture of the program. Long-winded answer. Hopefully we got there at the end, but yeah, lots of different ways to find out about culture. Talking to people is best, and it could change. That's all I can say. It could change. Somebody asked, is it appropriate to ask an interviewer what the general relationship between residents and the attendings is like? Okay. Yes, so between residents and attendings. The best person to ask this question to are the residents, because they will have the best insight into the relationship with residents and attendings. I just think they'll be more honest. They will take the time to explain to you like what readouts are like. They will explain to you, maybe some people are faster, some people are slower. They might even tell you specifically who is who. But yeah, attendings probably will not divulge that information. Also, to be fair, attendings often in radiology work like sort of alone, in the sense that I don't get to see how my colleagues are reading their cases. I don't get to see how they work. I don't get to see how fast they're going. Whereas residents work with all different attendings, and they see all different styles, and they probably would be able to speak to what the relationship is like. I think it's completely fair to ask that question, because there are definitely programs where it's a very traditional relationship where you respect your attendings, and then you maybe aren't like super friendly aside from just doing your work. And then there are sort of the opposite programs also where like you're very friendly and you know everything. Like my program was very friendly. They knew everything about me and I knew everything about them. At least I think I did. There's a wide spectrum of what that relationship can look like, and the residents are definitely the best people to answer that question. And to speak to the second part of that question about the relationship between residents, obviously you have to ask the residents that question because they're going to know that the best. But keep in mind that every class is different, and also keep in mind that you are interviewing for like 2 years sort of later, right? Because you are going to finish your 4th year, then you have to do an intern year, and then you're going to start. So you have some time before you start. So some of the classes that are there are not even going to be there when you start. So that relationship might look different. And again, it just depends on the personalities of your class, whether or not you all get along, whether or not you don't get along, whether or not you're friends with people in different classes. Like that just depends on you and who you end up matching with. So it can change. But yes, ask residents these questions. You can ask the attendings, but I think asking the residents is probably more fruitful. Keep in mind that everyone is trying to put their best foot forward. So if you do end up getting the same answer, like from every program, that yes, we all love each other, we love every resident, we love every attending, which we all know is not true. That's when talking to other residents that are in the same city can be really helpful, because like I said, they're like rumors that spread, or like you hear about other programs. And yeah, just talking like offline with other people, even just a phone call or something like that, can really shed some light onto what programs are like. So that really ties into the culture again. This is a good question, actually. How important is the interview in the residency selection process? Okay, great question. I think the interview is probably the most important part now that you have received an interview. I think that the application gets you the interview, but the interview gets you on your rank list. You know what I mean? Now, every program is different, and I obviously don't know that much about the internal ranking systems of many programs. I have just talked to people, and I know sort of like a baseline information about how things go. So I know that in some places it's purely based on vibes and feel, and like, we love this person and she's going to be number one at the top of our list. This guy we hated, he's going to put him at the bottom. Then there are some programs that do like a very detailed point system, like step scores, and interview, like if they had an average out of 10, you know, I don't know, like, oh, we liked this person 8 out of 10, so this person got 8 points for that or whatever. And then letters of recommendation and medical school and class rank, and then they create some sort of like formula, and that's how they rank you, regardless of how programs do it. And there are different ways. These are just 2 examples. The interview is a big part of it, because if you have a stellar application but you kind of suck as a person, people are going to want to work with you, and you might not end up at the top of a rank list. Versus, even if you have a weak application but you have a great personality and you are really someone that people see themselves working with long term, that can really bring you up to the top of a rank list. I mean, maybe like it can really give you a great chance of matching. So I do think it's very worthwhile to prepare for your interviews, to sort of become comfortable in front of the camera, to try not to get too nervous in front of the camera. It's hard. Interviews are hard. But yeah, it's really important. Interviews are extremely important for ranking and ultimately for matching, I would say. So prepare for your interviews. Ooh, this is a really good question. How should I respond to difficult or unexpected questions? This will happen to you inevitably, I feel like. And it'll always happen, I feel like, when you're totally not prepared. But sometimes it does come up, especially when you have a behavioral type question, or like, I don't know, something sort of just comes out of the blue. And I will also say that this happens when you accidentally say something you didn't mean to say, and then you're stuck in this uncomfortable position. So what do you do when you're stuck? Great question. I think, and it did happen to me. Like, I know exactly where I was, who I was interviewing with, what program I was interviewing at when it happened to me. And I think it totally I totally bombed that interview, because that was such a bad situation for me. But what I would say to my colleagues, who I hope would not be in that situation, would be to regroup, to pause, and just think about what you want to say. And that sounds crazy. It's so much easier in a virtual interview setting, because you have notes, you have things that you can refer to right away, you can take a sip of water, you have ways of distracting that you don't have when you're on an in-person interview. And I would always keep a list of, I never did this because I was in an in-person interview, but I would say that if I were interviewing now, I would keep a list of like 3 things that I can talk about that I could put into like any scenario, and I would try to just draw from that. If someone asks me a difficult question that I was not prepared for, I would try to find a way to relate it to something that I feel comfortable talking about. So something that I talked about a lot in my interviews was being on this dance team in college, because I could sort of relate it to like weaknesses, I could relate it to strengths, I could relate it to challenges that I've faced, ethical dilemmas, I could relate it to like teamwork and camaraderie, and in every possible scenario, I think I could relate it to this one thing. I know for somebody else, it was kickboxing, I think. For somebody else, it's like a sport, kickboxing is a sport, but you know what I mean, like a team of some sort, a musical instrument, a health issue or a family issue that happened. Like, you can try to find a scenario that you can relate to every potential like question that could come at you. And when you are stuck in that uncomfortable situation, that's where you have to pull from. You have to pull from these experiences that you just know inside and out, that you could relate to in every way. And so before you start your interviews, definitely think of like what that is for you. And how can you relate that? So I can give you my examples, I guess. I mean, these are not, I haven't thought about these in a really long time, so I'm just sort of like making this up as I go. But if you're gonna ask me a difficult question or a behavioral question about like, yeah, like what is your biggest weakness? Say my biggest weakness I said was being disorganized. Then I can relate that to my dance team and maybe how my disorganization as captain sort of affected the team in a negative way and how that taught me how to be positive or like how to be more organized and now I'm better or something. Like things like that. Like if you have a core experience that you can relate to, then these unexpected questions sort of become a lot easier if you just breathe for a second and think about it. Now, the question that I got tripped up on, I'll be honest with you, the question that I got tripped up on was, if I could have dinner with somebody, who would it be? And I'm not going to tell you, I mean, my answer I thought was great. My answer was great, I thought. But she asked me a follow-up question, and I totally stumbled on my words. And then I had to sort of backtrack and be like, no, that's not what I meant. I really meant blah, 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 blah. But by then I think that she was like already turned off by my answer, and so it didn't really go well for me. But I think what I should have done was pause and just like think for a second about how I'm going to recover from that horrible answer or like whatever I just said and sort of regroup but yeah, that's a completely different scenario. Anyways, I'm going on a tangent about this. If you end up saying the wrong thing, it's okay. Just ask to start over. Okay? I honestly think that like that is what I should have done, is just ask to start over and say like, sorry, let me just rephrase and totally start over. Say what you wanted to say it the right way. Maybe start off a little slower, but yeah. So that's sort of a two-part answer. Number one, have a core experience that you can basically turn any question, like you can answer any question with that experience. And number two, if you do stumble on your words or you say the wrong thing or something, obviously, if you say something really horrible, there may not be any recovery from that. But if you just stumble on your words, just ask if you can rephrase or like ask if you can start over, because like we get it. And yes, of course you can start over. Yeah. Like tell me what you actually meant to say, because I think that most people are pretty cool and would understand that you just sort of misspoke or like had a little bit of a fumble there. It's not a big deal. But yeah, I'm getting like PTSD from my own interview experience right now. Okay, moving on. What are some red flags in residency interviews? Hey, that's a great question, and I have a whole video about that, and there are a lot. Number one is obviously the unprofessional and illegal questions. Like, are you gonna have a family? Do you have a family? Are you married? Where did you interview? Where are you applying? Those are all, if they ask you these questions, like, they clearly have like blatant disregard for the rules, and I would not want to go to a program like that. Saying anything bad about other programs. I don't think that most people do that, but I guess you never know. Yeah, you never know, but yeah, don't go to a place that's saying bad stuff, because that means they're probably saying bad stuff about you too. Another red flag is getting different answers to the same question from different people. So I often recommend asking the same question to the program director, as like the residents, as, you know, maybe some random faculty member, because if you have consistency, at least it feels like it's actually true versus the PD telling you one thing and the residents are really saying something else, and that discrepancy can sort of make you think like, well, who's really telling the truth? Probably the residents, probably the residents. And then, like I said, I have a whole video about red flags in programs. So the last question is, how do you start to make a rank list? You know, like what do you do once the interview is done? And that's a really good question, because you will be amazed with how quickly you forget what happened in the interview. Now, things are different now, because when I was interviewing, there was no such thing as a spreadsheet. I didn't even know how many other programs people were applying to. I had no idea I didn't have any record of like how much call different programs had or how many faculty, or aside from what's on the website, right? Like, you know what's on the website, but you otherwise had no way of knowing any of this stuff unless you wrote it down. Regardless, though, I think it's still very important to write down your own personal information. The spreadsheet is great, but don't rely on the spreadsheet, because we all know it gets deleted and whatever, everything, it can implode at some point in the season. Regardless, you should write down your own notes, and also write down how you feel about the program, because you will not remember how you felt about a certain program 3 months later. You might, if you had one program that really stood out to you, you might remember it, but a lot of them get really blurry. And the reason is because all these programs are very similar, really similar. And I remember having a great feeling about so many programs. I was like, oh, I'd be good here, I'd be good here. But just to write it down, just in case. Like, write down what you really thought about it. I had like a spreadsheet that had like a fake rank list situation with different weights of like geography, and what did I have? Geography, I don't even remember. What did I care about? I can't even remember what I cared about. Volume, I think, was one of them. Volume of studies, which now we know everywhere, I feel like is just insane. So you don't have to worry about that necessarily. Whether it had like any away rotations or not. But see, like, again, like, does it matter if they had an away rotation or not? Like, I don't even think it matters in the grand scheme of things unless you specifically want to do like pediatric radiology and you want to go to a children's hospital. That could be something that matters to you. I guess the point is, write down what matters to you, right? Write down what matters to you at the beginning, knowing that probably once you become a resident, it may not matter to you anymore, but write down what matters to you, and then write down like your internal weight of how you feel like these things. And then at the very end, you'll end up with a sort of preliminary rank list. And then of course you can move things based on how you feel, but it'll give you a good sense of where things are and where different programs end up. But yeah, write it down and write down your own information. Don't rely on the spreadsheet. And remember that just because you loved a program and someone else hated that program doesn't mean that like you're wrong or they're wrong. That's just inherently how it is, right? Like, I like chocolate cupcakes, but if someone doesn't like a chocolate cupcake, doesn't mean the chocolate cupcake is bad. It just means that it's not their preference. And so I think with the spreadsheet, you end up with a lot of that like bias. Plus, I think with social media and everything, like there's so much that goes into like, oh, I interviewed a top 10, I interviewed a top 25. Did you get any top 10? Who cares? It doesn't matter as long as you're happy and you can be successful. I did not go to a top 10 residency program. I'm so grateful that I went where I did. I loved my program. I feel like I have ended up becoming a very good radiologist. I have had no shortage of job opportunities. And yeah, so I think that you are going to be fine. They will literally hire anybody right now, I feel like. So don't worry so much about that stuff. The spreadsheet, social media, it really emphasizes a lot of the wrong things in my opinion. So yeah, do what's right for you and your family, even if it is blasphemy, a community program in your hometown. You're gonna be fine. It's gonna be great. What matters is how you feel about it. And if you are happy, that's the most important thing above all. So that's what's gonna shape your experience. You know, it doesn't matter what anonymous member 35 thinks about your residency program. Like, literally, who cares? So that's my advice. I hope that this was a helpful video. I know it was very chatty. I am truly out of breath at this point. And if you have more questions, please put them down below. I can either make a part 2 or just answer them right there. And yeah, I will catch you all in my next video. Bye, and good luck. You're gonna do great. I'm out of breath.